hidden secrets, mysteries buried under your feet. What you're looking at is only the tip of the iceberg. And so you wonder, what in the world could be under the ground? What secrets are there? The ancients were able to change the molecular structure. Nobody knows who carved this gate or door into the stone. Whoever built this was using a level of precision simply incomprehensible for the human race.
Tim Alberino and the film crew went to the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia to document the evidence for fallen angels, giants, ancient architecture, ancient civilizations, and the correlation between all of them. Peru is one of the only nations where pre-flood architecture stands directly in proportion to post-flood architecture.
These massive stones have been fit so perfectly together that you can't even slip a piece of paper between them. This is beyond the capability of mere human beings.
Christians don't understand that the Bible answers the question of who the builders of the megaliths were. We have evidence and every indication that the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world are behind this historic deception and cover-up. There's an unseen hand that literally scours the earth in real time for any out-of-place artifact or anything that would come out from under the intelligence agency's control. Our investigations are revealing that the Vatican is a primary agent behind the cover-up of the pre-flood world. All roads lead to Rome. It's not only that it's a cover-up, but they're covering up in plain sight. And even though the evidence is there, they don't want you to know the truth behind it. The most powerful agencies in the world do not want this information released at this time. We're talking about the greatest cover-up in history. We are telling you why it's happening. We're in a time period, ladies and gentlemen, like no other in the history of the world. We're going to show you how the Bible answers the who, what, when, where, and how. Our basis is the book of Genesis. Our motivation is the truth.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Timothy Alberino y soy el director de la empresa Producciones GenSix. Trabajo con el autor muy conocido en los Estados Unidos llamado Steve Quayle, quien ha escrito varios libros sobre el tema que vamos a tratar hoy. El señor Quayle es considerado el experto en el tema de gigantes. Producciones GenSix se dedica a 3 objetivos: exploración, investigación y educación. El tema de nuestra presentación en esta mañana es el mundo antediluviano. Les quiero plantear en esta mañana una hipótesis sobre el mundo antediluviano. Pero antes de comenzar, tenemos que definir la palabra antediluviano. La palabra antediluviano significa el tiempo o la época antes del gran diluvio de Noé. En casi todas las grandes culturas del mundo antiguo, nos encontramos con una serie de mitos comunes. Entre ellos hay 3 que siempre surgen. El mito de los antiguos dioses que descendieron del cielo para tomar mujeres de las hijas de los seres humanos. El mito de los hijos de los dioses, los gigantes, que eran el producto de la relación sexual entre los dioses y las mujeres humanas. Y el mito de un gran cataclismo, en muchos casos un diluvio, que destruyó el imperio de los dioses y sus descendientes gigantes.
The reason I started GenSix Productions to produce the documentary series True Legends was to show you a side of history that you may not have been aware of. Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington, some of the most famous founding fathers of the United States of America all spoke of giants, not as if they were myth or legend, but they spoke in the context of them being fact. I've been studying and researching ancient giants, their architecture and their technology for over 40 years. As an aerial photographer as well as a researcher, I've been able to gain a perspective that very few people can acquire. Native American legends record giants between 14 and 18 feet tall being able to run alongside buffalo herds and scoop them up under their arms. What's fascinating about Montana is the complete association with giants of antiquity, the bison, and the Native Americans. It was not only did the Native Americans follow the bison, but 1,000 years ago, it was the Native Americans who had to flee and fight the giants. Naturally, that goes against everything that most people are taught in history, especially United States history. I see history through a biblical lens, believing that the book of Genesis lays out the entire understanding of who the ancient architects, master builders, and those who taught humanity advanced technology really were. The book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4, starting at verse 4, teaches that a group of fallen angels came to earth and mated with earth women, producing a super being, if you will, a hybrid. That hybrid is what ancient mythology and legends refers to the giants, or as the Old Testament calls them, the mighty men of renown. The architecture that you see that's on a scale that does not even equate to a human scale was built by these individuals. Every single culture that I have looked at in every corner of the world has their legends of the gods coming down, mating with earth women, and producing their heroes.
Así que lo que la Biblia nos dice es que los ángeles del cielo codiciaban las mujeres humanas y bajaron a la tierra para tomarlas como esposas y copular con ellas. Las mujeres se impregnaron con la semilla de los vigilantes, los ángeles caídos, y dieron a luz a seres híbridos, mitad ángel, mitad humano, los hijos de los dioses. Estos niños híbridos crecieron a gran estatura y eran extremadamente inteligentes y malvados.
While on expedition to Peru, Tim Alberino was invited to speak at the University of San Martin in the Amazon basin. None of the students had ever heard a biblical explanation for the megalithic structures found in their own country, but ironically, they all knew about ancient astronaut theory and the ancient aliens.
Es mi postulación de que el mundo antes del gran cataclismo, el diluvio de Noé, era muy diferente del mundo que conocemos hoy en día y sin embargo, en algunos aspectos, muy similar. Cuando pensamos en el mundo antiguo, tendemos a imaginar un mundo de ignorancia, con un bajo nivel de tecnología, progreso y conocimiento. Pero nada podría estar más lejos de la verdad. La verdad es que el mundo antes del diluvio de Noé fue un tiempo de gran conocimiento y tecnología más allá de lo que tenemos aún en nuestro propio tiempo. Creo que la evidencia para esta postulación se puede encontrar en todo el mundo, incluyendo en el Perú.
Peru is a fascinating country. Not only is Peru home to a diverse array of native cultures, but also a wide variety of amazing landscapes. You have the hot and humid jungles of the Amazon, the snow-capped peaks of the Andes Mountains, the beautiful Pacific coast, and one of the most barren deserts in the world, all within the borders of the same country. It also happens to be one of the best places on Earth where evidence for giants and fallen angel technology and architecture can still be found. Our expedition began in the district of Puno on the shores of Lake Titicaca in an area known as the Andean Plateau or the Altiplano, which is one of the most extensive areas of high plateaus on Earth, second only to Tibet. Most of the Altiplano lies within Peru and Bolivia, but its southernmost regions extend into Chile and Argentina.
Behind me is the city of Puno and Lake Titicaca. We're about 12,500 feet above sea level here. This is a very interesting place. Lake Titicaca is the largest lake in South America and the highest navigable lake in the whole world. The reason why we've come to Puno is because Puno is a gateway to a couple of the sites that we want to go to, one of which is Pumapunku on the border of Bolivia and Peru. Another is the alleged Stargate of Aramu Muru. We will be going to various other locations, investigating not only some of the megalithic ruins and some of the legends surrounding the builders of those ruins, but also investigating some of the reported paranormal phenomenon that happens here frequently.
There are a lot of legends connecting Lake Titicaca and the Altiplano with giants, very similar to the legends of the six-fingered, red-haired giants that once inhabited the Catalina Islands off the coast of California and the Lovelock Cave of Nevada. The whole region around Lake Titicaca has been reputed to be a hotbed of UFO activity.
En Juliaca, estas imágenes que vamos a ver a continuación fueron grabadas ayer exactamente a las 5:30 de la tarde. Este objeto no identificado se precipitó a tierra dejando una estela de humo.
We've come out here to the famous floating islands made of reeds here on Titicaca. And our objective here is to find some of the older people that can tell us some of the legends, because we know that there are legends of giants and of course all kinds of UFOs and strange phenomenon that takes place around the Titicaca area, especially right over the lake. So again, our hope is to get somebody to tell us some of those stories here on this floating reed island.
For many generations, certain factions within the Aymara people have been building and living on artificial islands made of reeds that grow in the shallows of the lake. Due to their isolation, these reed raft dwellers of Lake Titicaca have been able to maintain a lot of their own customs and traditions, including some of their old legends, which is what we were interested in. The first elderly native with whom we spoke on the floating islands recounted for us a few different stories of strange phenomena that he has witnessed on the lake in his lifetime. He told us about the typical saucer-shaped aerial craft with bright multicolored lights that appear over the lake, primarily at night, and move through the atmosphere in a very erratic manner. Sometimes these craft are seen darting through the night sky and then suddenly plunging down into the water. Presumably to some kind of hidden base under the lake. Based on the testimony of some of the other natives on the floating islands, sightings of these craft seem to be a fairly common occurrence. We were also told about bizarre creatures that fly over the lake and sometimes land on the reed rafts. These entities were described to us as demonic winged beings that emit a blood-curdling scream. One very elderly woman recounted an ancient Aymara legend about little evil beings that float over the lake in canoes and steal children from the rafts. In truth, I was really hoping to hear some of the legends concerning the giants that once inhabited the area, but the few Aymara elders with whom we were able to speak admittedly had forgotten most of the old tales. Unfortunately, much of the culture of the Aymara people living on Lake Titicaca has been lost or forgotten and replaced with a very superficial, and to a degree artificial, culture that they maintain mainly for the sake of paying tourists. One thing is for sure, there is definitely a lot of UFO activity around Lake Titicaca. Almost everyone we talked to had a story to tell, including the driver of our boat and our security guard, who told us about a vivid encounter that he and his family had experienced.
Veía, ¿cómo se llama?, en el cielo que estaba despejado sin nada de nubes.
He was looking up into an open blue sky.
Vi una esfera en el cielo brillante.
He saw a shining sphere in the sky.
Era plateado y redondo.
And it was like a silver shining circular object flying in the sky, hovering in the sky.
Y brillaba, o sea, parecía con el reflejo del sol.
And it was shining almost as if it was reflecting the sunlight.
Tenía brillo y posteriormente se quedó, estaba, ¿no?, en un solo sitio.
And it was staying in one spot.
Posteriormente, algo de 20 minutos, quedamos pasmados nosotros con mi esposa y mis hijos, ¿no? Y luego de eso, nosotros tratamos de hacer señales con el...
So it was hovering in one spot for a while, and then he got his wife and his kids to come look at it, and they went inside and got a mirror to try and to communicate with it using the reflection of the sun.
El reflejo con el espejo, y empezó a moverse.
And when they were doing that, it started to slowly move around.
No una velocidad rápida, no, sino lenta, así
so it wasn't going fast; it was just moving slowly.
Si estuviese llevándoselo el viento.
As if the wind was blowing it, just moving slowly.
Llevándoselo para el lado del cerro.
And it was moving towards the mountain.
Y eso fue por el mes de agosto aproximadamente, cuando había bastante viento.
And that was in the month of August, cuando había bastante viento.
Sí,
when there's a lot of wind. Y ¿estás seguro que era como un objeto de metal o qué cosa?
Sí, eso era un objeto exclusivamente de metal, porque no le logramos divisir, a pesar de la distancia que había no se lograba ver bien cómo era, pero nosotros hemos visto que era un objeto redondo.
Yeah, and I asked him if he was sure that it was a metallic object, and he said, yeah, they could tell that it was a metallic object. It wasn't really close, but it was easy to see that it was some kind of metallic object.
Sí, eso es lo único que hemos tratado de ver. Nosotros no imaginábamos qué era, ¿no?
And he said that they didn't know what it was.
Y ¿cómo se llama? Eso,
pero no fue natural, fue algo artificial.
Algo sobre, ¿no? Que no era natural.
And he's just confirming that it wasn't natural, it was something artificial.
Y eso es lo único que se ha podido.
And that's what he saw.
Whether or not an underground base or city actually exists beneath the waters of Lake Titicaca, we were definitely able to confirm that this is a UFO hotspot. Before setting out to explore the megalithic ruins of Tiwanaku, and the alleged Stargate of Aramu Muru. We wanted to talk with a university-level archaeologist to find out if any evidence for giants had ever been officially discovered in the area, and if any strange phenomena had ever been officially recorded at Aramu Muru. We contacted the National University in Puno, and they referred us to a well-known and respected archaeologist working in the Altiplano. Hemos oído historias de fenómeno extraño relacionado con la puerta de Aramu Muru. ¿Ha experimentado usted fenómeno extraño allí?
Bueno, como fenómeno extraño, no sé exactamente si corresponda a esa categoría, pero alguna vez explorando en la zona tuve un inconveniente con la brújula, con el compás, en la que por un momento la aguja estaba totalmente desubicada y se movía muy rápidamente, como que hubiera una fuerza magnética importante en ese momento. Pero eso fue también durante un momento y después terminó. Pero si eso es un fenómeno extraño relacionado a Aramu Muru o Altarani, como es el nombre, pues sí tuve algo que ver con eso.
Como arqueólogo, ¿alguna vez ha visto usted artefactos o huesos que podrían haber pertenecido a gigantes?
No, definitivamente nunca he encontrado personalmente ningún tipo de evidencia que pueda sugerir la existencia de gigantes o haber pertenecido a gigantes. No aquí en el altiplano, no he encontrado nada de eso acá.
¿Existen registros históricos de gigantes en el Perú?
Sí, existen registros documentales en documentos del siglo XVI y XVII. Varios cronistas han hecho la mención a la existencia de gigantes aquí en los Andes en general, ¿no? Y algunos de manera particular se refieren a la zona del altiplano.
Profesor, gracias por su tiempo.
Encantado, mucho gusto.
There are many historical accounts of giants in Peru, most of which were recorded by the Spanish priests and chroniclers in the early 17th century, following the conquest of the Incan Empire. The tradition of the Inca are filled with legends of giants. In fact, the Inca believed that many of the megalithic structures found in their lands were built by the giants. But their belief in giants was not only based on the megalithic structures, but on the bones of the giants. In the mid-16th century, 168 Spanish conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro obliterated the Incas with modern weapons of war and smallpox. The conquistadors were looking for gold, and they found it in great abundance. But what they did not expect to find were the bones of colossal giants, which they discovered all over the land. One of the most detailed accounts of giants in Peru was written by renowned conquistador and chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, who recorded a popular legend among the natives concerning giants that landed on the peninsula of Santa Elena, which was once part of the province of Peru but now belongs to Ecuador. The legends tell of a tribe of evil giants that came from the sea riding on large boats made of reeds. The natives say that the giants were so large that a man of common stature measured only up to their knees.
The natives relate what they have heard from their fathers, that from over the sea in large boats made of reeds came men so large that a man of common body proportions measured only up to their knees, though he be of good stature, and that their members conformed to the greatness of their bodies, which were so deformed that it was a monstrous thing to see the heads, accordingly large, and their hair which reached down to their backs. They point out that their eyes were as big as small plates. They affirm that they did not have beards, and that some of them came dressed in animal skins, while others were in their natural clothes, and that they did not bring women with them.
When the giants landed at Santa Elena, they built massive houses and dug extremely deep wells. The infamous houses of the giants were still standing, and their wells were still in use during and after the conquest of Peru. They're referenced numerous times in the historical records from that era.
At this peninsula, even though it is beach, the natives that come down from Panama drink water and refresh themselves. There were once giants here, and the natives say that they don't know from whence they came. Their houses were 3 leagues below the anchorage, made of 2 gables with very large beams. I saw some of these beams being brought on rafts to be incorporated into a building that was being constructed by the viceroy of those Indians, named Alonso de Vera. I also saw the large tooth of a giant, which weighed more than 10 ounces. The Indians say, according to the tradition of their ancestors, that the giants did not have women, and not willing to wait for what was natural, were given over to sodomy, for which God punished them by sending fire from heaven, and so destroyed all of them. This kind of notorious vice has no other remedy.
Once their houses and wells were completed, the giants began ransacking the countryside and devouring all the sustenance of the land. It was said that a single giant consumed more food than 50 of the natives combined.
These large men, or giants, having established their settlement and constructed these wells or cisterns from which they drank, they destroyed and devoured all of the sustenance they could find in that region, so much so that they say that one of them consumed more food than 50 of the natives of that land. And as the food that they found was not enough to sustain them, they killed a lot of fish in the sea with their nets and riggings, which according to reason they had.
The natives hated the giants, not only because they were consuming all of their food, but also because they were taking and killing their women by attempting to have intercourse with them. Basically, the giants were raping their women to death.
The natives lived in great loathing of them because they killed their women by using them and for other reasons. And the Indians were not strong enough to kill these new people who had come to occupy their land and lord over them, even though they had great meetings to discuss them, but they did not dare attack them.
Since the giants didn't bring any women with them and they were too large for the native women, the giants began to sodomize each other and to practice their sin out in the open without shame or fear of divine judgment. One day, while they were engaged in the act, a bright angel appeared in the sky above them, wielding a shining sword. The angel threw down fire and lightning on the giants until they were completely consumed in the flames, and only their charred bones remained as a testimony to their divine judgment.
And all of the natives affirm that the Lord our God, not being served to overlook such an evil sin, sent them a judgment according to the ugliness of the sin. And thus they say that as they were together enveloped in their damned sodomy, fire came down from a dreadful sky with great noise, in the midst of which came forth a resplendent angel with a sharp shining sword, with which in one single blow he killed all of them. And the fire consumed them, so that all that was left were the bones and skulls, which God wanted to remain unconsumed by the fire, as a memorial of their judgment. This is what they say about the giants, which we believe happened, because in this region they have found, and find still, massive bones. And I have heard of Spaniards that have seen fragments of teeth, that they swore that if they were whole, would weigh more than a butcher's half-pound. and also that they have seen another fragment of shin bone, that it is amazing to account how large it was, which testifies that all of this truly happened. And even besides all of this, one can still see where their village was, and the wells and cisterns which they made.
Interestingly enough, this same story concerning the Sodomite giants that were destroyed in the judgment of God was so popular among the natives of Peru that many of the chroniclers make mention of it in their writings. In fact, even Francisco Pizarro and his men saw the bones with their own eyes while passing through Santa Elena.
Francisco Pizarro and his company arrived at Puerto Viejo into Santa Elena, where they saw a large quantity of bones of giants that, according to their proportion, were 20 palms tall. The Indians had a tradition concerning these giants that they were people from before the flood, because giants of such huge size were never known to exist again. Others say that they were sodomites, and that in one day fire fell from heaven and consumed them all. Speaking of the giants that existed in ancient times, in what is called today the peninsula of Santa Elena, Provincial Father Torquemada says these words in his book, Indian Monarchy. Speaking of the giants that existed before or after the flood in these native lands, and it's true that after the flood they existed in the New World, and it is said that it was well known that there were giants that came from other parts, whose greatly deformed bones are still found to this day near Manta and Puerto Viejo. And according to their proportion, they had to be men in stature, more than 3 times the size of the Indians of today. They say that these giants came from over the sea, and that they made war with those on the land, and that they raised mighty edifices, some of the stones of which still stand today in testimony of their greatness. They also say that these giants, being terrible sinners, practicing incest and sodomy, were burned and consumed with fire that came from heaven. This is the witness of Father Torquemada, and Teodoro de Bray also references the same in his book entitled De Natura Nobi Orbis. Added to this are the known traditions that all of these giants, whose bones are still seen to this day in that beautiful place, died in flames, because a young handsome man, these Indians did not know of the existence of angels, threw lightning down upon them and incinerated all of them, leaving only their bones, so that they would remain as a dreadful witness.
The legend of the giants of Santa Elena is well known and has been sanctimoniously dismissed as pure myth by historians who claim that the giant bones found by the conquistadors and chroniclers in Peru were nothing more than the bones of mastodons and giant sloths. This argument might be persuasive if mastodons and giant sloths could build houses and dig wells. But the real problem for historians is that the legend of the giants at Santa Elena was scientifically proven to be true in 1543 by Captain Juan Olmos, who dug up not only the bones but also the heads of the giants.
And with all of this, full credit has never been given to what the Indians said about these giants, until, being the lieutenant governor at Puerto Viejo in the year 1543, Captain Juan Olmos, native of Trujillo, hearing all of these things, conducted an excavation in that valley, where he found such gigantic ribs and other bones, that if the heads had not been found with them, it would not have been believable that they were human beings. And thus, by his own investigation, and seeing the signs of the lightning that punished them, he confirmed what the Indians had said to be true. And he sent throughout the diverse regions of Peru some of the teeth that they found there, each one which measured 3 fingers in width and 4 in length.
The Incas, the conquistadors, and the chroniclers all agree that there were giants in the land. On more than one occasion, the conquistadors found gigantic human skulls, so large when they stuck their swords into the eye socket of the skull, the tip of the blade barely touched the back of the cranial cavity.
One thing that cannot be denied, as much as for the tradition of the Indians themselves, as for the signs and relics that are still present, is that there were once giants in this land. How they came to this land and from where, and how long they lived in it is uncertain. the first Spanish conquistadors of this kingdom, found in the peninsula and port of Santa Elena, Diocese of Quito, human bones of massive size that they knew belonged to giants, and among them some shin bones more than 3 feet long. Many other bones of the same proportion have been discovered afterwards in other parts of that same province, and in the province of Trujillo. Also bones of equal size have been seen further inland, as in the province of Tucumán and Tarija. In the latter of these, a whole body was discovered beneath the ravine, or bank of a river, that the water, having eroded the bank, had unearthed. It was so massive that its grave occupied a very large space, and its skull was so abnormally gigantic that some of the Spaniards, thrusting their swords through its eye socket, could barely reach the back side of its head with the points of their blades. In the province of Santa Cruz in the Sierra, the governor was an honest Christian gentleman named Don Lorenzo Suarez de Figueroa that populated the city of San Lorenzo, capital of that province. And he found something during the conquest of Tucumán. This gentleman used to say that while marching in that conquest, they discovered an ossuary that appeared to contain more than 100 human bodies, and all of the bones belonged to enormous giants. And he himself thrust his sword through one of the skulls, and the whole blade passed into the cavity. From that same region of Tucumán and Tarija, they brought back to the Villa de Potasi some years ago a great quantity of bones of giants. All of them were in pieces, so that there was not one entire bone except for some teeth. But their abnormally gigantic size demonstrated that they were from massive bodies. Each tooth was no smaller than a fist. One of them was weighed at 11 ounces, which made the man who weighed it a believer. I am not sure if the bones that were shown to me in the city of Lima were the same ones, but among them was a tooth of the same size of those that I have mentioned. And it is true that even though it had the form of a perfect tooth, it was so old that it seemed more like a rock than a bone.
This is a modern adaptation of a 16th century shell-hilt rapier sword, something like what some of the conquistadors might have used. The blades on most of these rapiers were between 36 and 43 inches. This sword has a 41-inch blade. This gives you an idea of just how large the skulls that the conquistadors were finding really were. We're definitely dealing with giants well over 15 feet tall. In fact, some reports claim that the bodies of giants 6 times the size of normal men were discovered in Peru.
And also to the houses of the Juarez, which were the first inhabitants of that land, that they say were giants. And it is true that in some places they were, because deformed bones have been found of incredible size, that those who have not seen them, nor touched them with their hands would not believe, because they demonstrate the proportion of the bones, that they were 6 times bigger than men of our day. And in their land they bring their sick, and for evil purposes relating to love. They invoke the Huari, whom they say is the god of forces, when they go out to make their farms or houses, so that he lends them his strength.
After the conquest of the Incas, the Catholic Church sent priests from the various orders to convert the pagan natives to Christianity. The Kingdom of Spain also sent official inspectors to aid the efforts of the priests and to inspect the affairs of their newly conquered province. Together, the priests and the inspectors worked to exterminate idolatry in Peru. They discovered that the natives worshipped the giants, and so the corpses and bones of the giants were burned wherever they were found. Official records were made concerning these activities, including the discovery of 3 giants with elongated heads enshrined in a cave.
They took us to the other side of the village, about a quarter of a league, where a very large cave was, and in it many dead Gentiles. And among them were 3 bodies of giants with deformed heads, dressed in kumbi, but rotted with time. These are the progenitors of all this people, whom they worshipped and revered. There were many traces of sacrifices. They burned the bodies in the village. They worshipped high mountains, elevated mounds, and the houses of the Juarez, who were the first inhabitants, the sons of each land, that they say were giants. And it's true, this is the information that the official inspectors of idolatry and Father Pablo Jose detail in the 10th chapter, that on the other side of the village was a very large cave, and in it many dead Gentiles, and among them 3 bodies of giants with deformed skulls, dressed in kumbi. These are the progenitors of all this people that worship them. The testimony of this investigation is true, and the official inspectors took the giants from their shrines and burned them. It's been authenticated, and each giant would have been at least 12 rods in height, since a medium man of our time is 2 rods, and they were the size of 6 men.
People always ask me, if giants existed, then where are all the bones? The answer is simple. They've all been incinerated or confiscated by the Vatican or by other institutions such as the Smithsonian. In fact, many of the bones found throughout Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador in the 16th and 17th centuries were sent to Lima and ended up in the hands of the Inquisition.
Bones of huge giants and bodies 6 rods in height have been found, as the official inspectors have affirmed, and Father Pablo Jose in his book. And this size, they say, could only be found before the flood. One is here in Lima, brought from a place near Potasi, whose bones are of excessive magnitude. But even he who has not measured the bones believes that this is the way it must have been, and even more so, because before the flood there were sinners who were giants. The Indians believe that many were turned into mounds, and this is why they worship them in stone. Today in Lima there are the bones of a giant that was sent last week from Chuquisaca by the canon Dr. Avila that came to this cathedral, and I saw them in the office of the Secretary of the Holy Inquisition, having extremely long shin and thigh bones. The kneecap alone measured more than 1.5 feet, but the height cannot be precisely determined because the bones are broken. The bottom jaw measured 1.5 feet, and it has fingers that are more than 1.5 feet long. Last year on the 1st of September 1630, a mestizo boy 18 years old was brought to Lima from Huamanga named Juan Nunez, who was 8.5 feet tall and with feet more than 1.5 feet long. He has since died in Pisco.
The legends of the Incas say that God transformed some of the giants into hills and mounds. The reason they believe this is because just like in the 19th century of the United States, the bones of giants were found buried in the mounds. As a matter of fact, all over the world, the bones of giants are always associated with mounds and giant edifices. The conquistadors and chroniclers were not just discovering the bones of giants in the province of Peru, but all over the Americas, to such an extent that they wondered if all the giants were of the same race.
Not only in Peru are there traces of giants, but also in New Spain. And this demonstrates that they inhabited all of America. And even though we cannot determine the time in which they lived, we know that they did not arrive during the reign of the Incas. And I think that since the time when the giants died off until the Incas began to reign, some centuries had passed. And so, according to the fame and the evidence that we have found, there were once giants in these native lands in times past. In this year of 1550, I heard it said, being in the City of Kings, and in the presence of the illustrious Don Antonio de Mendoza, Viceroy and Governor of New Spain, where certain bones were found of men as large as these giants, and even bigger. And besides this, I have also heard before in the Agora, that in an ancient grave in the city of Mexico, or in another part of that kingdom, certain bones of giants were found. These giants seem to have been everywhere, since so many have seen them and affirmed their existence. And they might even all be of the same race.
The Inca believed that the giants that existed before the Great Flood were of a much more colossal size than those that existed after the flood. The smaller post-flood giants could still be found in the land and even fought in some of their battles.
And in the aforementioned battle, they say that 2 giants were killed, whose bones are presently in Chacaro, set upon pedestals. The archaeologists contacted us on the evening
before we set out to Tiwanaku in Bolivia. He wanted us to meet one of his colleagues, Professor Mario Hurtado, who teaches engineering at the University of Puno. We learned that Professor Hurtado had been conducting his own investigation on the megalithic ruins in Peru and Bolivia and had arrived at some very interesting conclusions. I asked the professor if he'd be willing to accompany us to Tiwanaku, since he had done research himself and was very familiar with the area, and he heartily accepted.
Tiwanaku, it's one of the most compelling megalithic sites on the planet. It's located in the Altiplano of Bolivia, right across the border with Peru. One of the reasons why we went to Tiwanaku was to follow up on the research of the late author David Flynn. David Flynn, my friend, was truly one of the geniuses of our day. In 2008, David wrote an article entitled Discovery of Vast Prehistoric Works Built by Giants. The article details a surprising discovery that David made while viewing satellite images over the Altiplano, especially around Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca. What he found was a gigantic network of repetitious geometric shapes that he referred to as prehistoric geoglyphs. The geoglyphs are strange configurations of interlocking rectangular and circular cells comprised of raised mounds and lines that form a continuous circuit-like grid. Some of the lines are actually carved into the various layers of the earth at different depths, creating a multicolored array of shapes. The geoglyphs extend for over 100 miles from the shores of Lake Titicaca, southward into the Bolivian desert. Some people have suggested that the geoglyphs are nothing more than the remains of ancient farm terraces, but David clearly refutes this and deals with the evidence against that argument.
Everywhere we went in both Peru and Bolivia, we saw extensive terracing carved into the sides of the mountains. It was everywhere. The archaeologists with whom we spoke confirmed, unequivocally in fact, that these terraces belonged to a very ancient pre-Inca civilization. It was vexing to find so much terracing in such an inhospitable and infertile environment, 13,000 feet above sea level. When one encounters this amount of terracing, the logical inference is that at one time there was a very robust and large civilization inhabiting the area, which is probably a good indication that the Altiplano was not always so desolate or so high above sea level.
David points out that many of the geoglyphs around Tiwanaku appear to have been intentionally arranged in a very specific set of configurations. David compared the geoglyphs to the complex system of communication developed by the Inca called quipus. Quipus was a system of written language that used an arrangement of knotted ropes to communicate extremely complex information, intelligible only to the highly trained Inca elite. Even the Spanish conquistadors were impressed with the amount of information that could be communicated through this seemingly primitive form of written language. They recorded that quipus was capable of conveying not only census and crop data, but also the lineage of kings and other historical information.
When I analyzed the satellite images of the geoglyphs that Flynn discovered, comparing them with what I actually saw on the ground, I couldn't help but wonder if the terraces themselves were not actually built for agriculture, but for some other unknown purpose. You really get a sense that there's something almost alien about these geoglyphs, as if they represent some kind of an incredibly complex system of communication, like a written language literally imprinted on the surface of the earth.
It's obvious that the Incas did not make the geoglyphs, but maybe the language used by the civilization that did was somehow discovered by them. And then they developed it into a much more practical application for their own use. Or they were mentored by those who were still alive at that time, who were literally born of the combination of fallen angels and human women, who we're talking about were the giants.
Los vigilantes les enseñaron a los gigantes, sus hijos, los secretos prohibidos del cielo, lo que llamamos en nuestra época moderna la ciencia y la tecnología avanzada. Les enseñaron a trabajar con metales de la tierra, les enseñaron a hacer armas de fierro para la guerra, les enseñaron a trabajar con piedras megalíticas, cómo cortar, mover y moldearlas. Les enseñaron la astrología y la cosmología, los movimientos de los planetas y las estrellas. Y les enseñaron la brujería para controlar los poderes de la naturaleza. Y la tierra se llenó de maldad.
When we finally pulled into the town of Tiwanaku, after about a 40-minute drive from the border, I was immediately struck by how stoic and oppressive the atmosphere was. We discovered rather quickly that the Bolivian Ministry of Culture had the entire area locked down in what I can only describe as a police state surveillance operation, complete with its own special security contingency and what appeared to be, at least in some cases, English-speaking informants with cameras. The first site in Tiwanaku that we wanted to visit was Pumapunku. Pumapunku is perhaps one of the best examples on Earth of incomprehensibly advanced technology in the distant past, which according to conventional history should not exist.
What's really interesting is that many of the early chroniclers that visited Pumapunku were convinced that A, it was built by giants, and B, it was definitely built before the Great Flood. And the Incas also believed that. The Spanish chroniclers accompanying Francisco Pizarro during his conquest of Peru recorded that the Incas believed that Pumapunku had been constructed by a race of ancient giants called the Huaris and was already in ruins before their civilization began. According to the Inca, this race of giants was created by the god Viracocha, who rose up from the depths of Lake Titicaca.
Because of the tight security in the area, we decided to be as low-key as possible and try not to give the impression that we were shooting video. So we opted not to use the lapel mic, and our cameraman pretended to be taking pictures instead of filming. I was surprised to find that the ruins of Pumapunku are now completely roped off, which we were told is a measure of control that had been only recently implemented. In fact, you're not even allowed to touch the stones anymore, which is of course unacceptable if your purpose is to conduct a thorough investigation. We certainly didn't come all that way just to stand there and stare at the stones. Our logistics guy, Benny, at one point went over and distracted the guards so that me and the cameraman could jump the lines and perform a proper analysis. Now, I had reviewed a lot of photos and footage of Pumapunku before visiting the site myself, but I have to say that images do not do it justice. You have to get up close to these magnificent blocks of hard andesite and actually put your hands on them to really appreciate how masterful the builders were. I was thoroughly amazed at the impossible craftsmanship I witnessed in stone. Incredibly precise right angles, intricate engravings, ingenious interlocking pieces, and surfaces that were still glassy smooth, even after being blasted by thousands of years of wind and rain. There were stones incorporated into the structures at Pumapunku that literally weighed hundreds of tons, and according to archaeologists, were quarried from over 60 miles away. Some say 200 miles away. The megalithic blocks at Pumapunku are primarily comprised of solid andesite and red sandstone. Now, obviously, red sandstone is a softer rock than andesite, but it seemed to me that for the builders of Pumapunku, andesite was just as easy to work with as sandstone, because the very same level of precision is exhibited in both.
We have two different kinds of stones represented here, at least in this area we're in right now. We have these huge megalithic sandstone blocks, but then we also have very, very hard andesite blocks.
Apart from the incredibly precise cuts and smooth surfaces, these massive building blocks were designed with modular fittings to interlock with one another. It is also apparent that at least some of the stones were held together by additional eye-shaped metal clamps, very likely poured into the molds, carved directly into the stone. Although the actual clamps themselves have been long since plundered, the impressions or molds of the clamps are still evident in the stone.
Conventional archaeologists maintain that a pre-Inca civilization using primitive tools and without even the benefit of the wheel or a written language for that matter were the builders of Pumapunku. The controllers of history want us to believe that the ancient world was primitive, ignorant, and yet at the same time they were somehow able to accomplish impossible things, such as build palaces like Pumapunku, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, all the ancient wonders of the world. And they did it, by the way, with only ropes, stone hammers, and copper chisels. They can't have it both ways.
En la visita que hoy hemos hecho al lugar que se llama Pumapunku en Tiwanaku, entonces hemos podido verificar que las piedras tienen un acabado bastante fino, ¿no? Tienen un acabado vidriado, que de tal manera que parece un espejo el acabado de cada piedra.
H-blocks here, the famous H-blocks of Pumapunku appear to have had at one time a vitrified glass-like surface, and he says that all of the blocks like this used to be covered with this kind of very smooth glass-like surface, but over time it's worn off.
Entonces, la posibilidad es que mucho más antes ha existido una tecnología que nuestra historia, en su línea del tiempo, lo ha perdido.
This civilization was indisputably in possession of advanced knowledge and working with what can only be described as advanced technology that we believe was ultimately derived from the teachings of the Watchers as defined in the Genesis 6 narrative in the Old Testament. In fact, Arthur Poznański, a well-known and well-respected engineer and archaeologist who studied Tiwanaku for over 50 years during the early 20th century, discovered huge elongated skulls while excavating the area.
The whole time our team was at the Pumapunku location, we were impressed with the notion that what we were seeing was just literally the tip of the iceberg. In other words, the vast majority of the ruins of Pumapunku are still buried under the ground. One gets the distinct sense that there is much more buried under the ground at Pumapunku than what has been presented on the surface. Artifacts and secrets that somebody doesn't want dug up.
The research of Arthur Poznański revealed that Pumapunku had been devastated in a massive flood that deposited at least 6 feet of sediment over the whole area. Seashells and tropical plant residues have been excavated in this layer of sediment. What we have in Pumapunku is evidence of the great flood of Noah. The stones themselves, just like the Sphinx of Egypt, show evidence of having been submerged and eroded underwater.
Apart from showing signs of having been swallowed up in a massive flood, the structures also appear to have been decimated in some kind of an explosion before they were buried in the sediment. Fragments of andesite are scattered all throughout the area as if a Hellfire missile had struck the structure and blown it to pieces. This is actually concurrent with the narrative found in the book of Enoch concerning the offspring of the Watchers, which annihilated each other in an epic war that preceded the flood of Noah. Now, we're the only ones in this hotel right in the middle of all of these megalithic ruins all around us, including Pumapunku and the rest of the temple here in Tiwanaku. We're literally right in the middle of this situation, and it's nighttime, and there's nobody in this hotel except for us. It's just a really bizarre feeling knowing that at some time in the distant past, this whole valley, this whole Altiplano area here in Bolivia was full of activity, and that these megalithic structures were fully built, and who knows what was going on here. Something very strange was definitely going on. Tiwanaku is a confusing place. There are a number of different archaeological sites within the area surrounding the town of Tiwanaku, which derives its name from the Spanish rendition of the word Tiwanaku. To the east of the town of Tiwanaku, you have the temple of Kalasasaya, the subterranean temple, and the Acapana pyramid complex, among other ruins. To the south, less than a mile away, are the remains of Pumapunku. What makes Tiwanaku so confusing and even misleading is the fact that the ruins dispersed across the land belong to at least two separate cultures from vastly different time periods. The megalithic remains of a highly advanced antediluvian race are buried 6 feet beneath the sediment deposited by the Great Flood, as Arthur Poznansky confirmed. But because other native peoples inhabited the area long after the antediluvian civilization was destroyed, the remains of their cultures are also present. Here at the Tiwanaku site in Bolivia, we have different kinds of constructions. We have constructions that are very old, pre-flood constructions, and then we have what I consider to be post-flood constructions that are of inferior technology. But the thing is that it's all kind of mixed together in this one area, and so you have to really be able to tell the difference between what would be the more advanced technology compared to the newer, less advanced technology. It's all mixed together here. Many of the most impressive artifacts that once stood in Tiwanaku have been plundered over the centuries by looters looking for treasure and locals looking for building materials. To make matters worse, the Bolivian army once used what little remained as target practice for their artillery. Then, in the 1950s, a nationalist Bolivian regime attempted to reassemble all of the pieces in order to promote tourism and national pride. The reconstruction was executed with haste and blatant disregard for historical accuracy. Instead, much of what now stands has been completely fabricated with modern building materials and glued together with cement. Many of the artifacts that belong to the technologically advanced antediluvian race, such as the famous Gate of the Sun and the monoliths made of pure andesite, have been moved from where they were originally discovered and intentionally placed within the new constructions to give the impression that one great pre-Inca Bronze Age level civilization built everything between 530 and 600 AD. Basically, the Bolivian government wanted Tiwanaku to be their version of Peru's Machu Picchu. Added to all of this confusion is the ever-present conspiracy to cover up the evidence of the highly advanced non-human races that existed in the world before the flood of Noah. Tiwanaku, like most of the major antediluvian archaeological sites around the globe, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. UNESCO is an acronym for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. People have to understand that the narrative of history is carefully controlled and to a degree contrived to promote a Darwinian paradigm, and more importantly, to conceal the biblical reality of the world before the flood of Noah, when the hybrid offspring of the fallen angels walked the earth. The technology of these fallen entities and the knowledge they possessed is voraciously coveted by the secret societies and intelligence agencies operating in the shadows all around the world, and quickly confiscated wherever and whenever it is found.
Everywhere we go around the world, where our research leads us in looking for the evidence of giants, we run into the same cover-up. Not just the existence of giants, but of the pre-flood world in general. There is a concerted effort to hide the fact that there were advanced, highly advanced civilizations living in the dateless past. Not only do archaeologists deny this fact, but some of them have actually been caught staging artifacts to mislead the public.
It seems like they're purposely mixing in some of the stones and artifacts from Pumapunku and just distributing them all around this area.
The Inca, the conquistadors, and many of the chroniclers believed that Tiwanaku was built by a race of ancient giants before the flood. Not only did they believe that Tiwanaku was built by giants, but it was also commonly accepted that the huge monoliths discovered there were fashioned in the likeness and stature of their builders, who were not at all like the natives that inhabited the land after the flood. The fact that the giants sculpted colossal statues in their own likeness and stature was well known in the ancient world and was certainly part of Inca lore.
Something that we notice when you get up close here is that this monolith, whoever this represents, is bearded. He has a beard and a mustache, which is of course not common for the native peoples around here. So on the side of this monolith with the beard and mustache, we have this serpent carved into the side, which it could be indicative of the plumed serpent deities, the plumed serpent godmen that were said to have brought the civilization and taught the native peoples here in South America.
There's a very interesting story related to Tiwanaku that is cited as fact by the famous chronicler and historian Bernabe Cobo in his History of the New World, published in 1653. The story concerns the first Spanish viceroy of Tiwanaku, named Captain Juan de Vargas. According to Cobo, Captain Vargas was confronted by a very strange individual who gave him an ancient map depicting the city of Tiwanaku before it was destroyed. The map showed the arrangements of all the buildings and the exact location of great treasures buried beneath them. Cobo relates in great detail what Vargas discovered when he began to dig. He began to dig in the areas among the buildings, according to what that man, or demon, for so he believed him to be, had related to him. And by the signs and signals he had presented to him, he discovered exactly what the map had accurately indicated. At first, he removed many jars full of very fine clothes made of maguey, silver vases and pitchers, a great quantity of beads and cinnabar. He unearthed a skeleton or corpse of a giant human body. And continuing in his discoveries, very pleased as he came upon every signal he had remembered, one day he found a very large human head made of gold, whose face was very similar to the idols of stone mentioned earlier. He did not dig for the pleasure of it, but was driven by greed to find even greater wealth. But it didn't last long, because the next night, death overtook him, even though he had went to bed without any ailment. This incident caused much fear and snuffed out the greed of those who would have continued to dig in search of the treasures that they supposed were buried among the mentioned buildings. After a while, the authorities were really getting irritated with us.
Listen, they're on to us now. They're on to us now.
But let's walk around.
I think because you got to remember, a lot of these people speak English, and they know what we're saying.
Yeah.
So we got to get our footage and get the hell out of here.
All of the guards seemed to be dialed in on us, and they were even pulling out these little phones they had attached to their belt buckles, pulling them out and trying to take covert pictures of us and then slipping them back in their pockets.
She just took out a little camera and took a picture of us.
I know, I saw.
Did you see it?
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we were getting concerned that our footage was going to get confiscated, or worse, we were going to get thrown into some Bolivian jail.
Yeah, I think we've pushed the envelope as far as we should today. I think we need to just wrap it up and get out of here.
The whole time we were in Bolivia, we were under surveillance. It was a relief to finally walk across that bridge and re-enter Peru with all of our camera gear and footage still in our possession. Our next objective is to go and film at the alleged Stargate of Aramu Muru. Our hope is to be able to talk to some of the older villagers and get their testimonies, get some of their stories, perhaps some of the legends surrounding the area, and then to camp out in front of the actual site and see what happens.
Aramu Muru is located near the town of Huli in an area known as the Valley of the Spirits. No one knows who carved the gate-like design into the rock, but most archaeologists agree it was definitely pre-Inca.
When we arrived at our destination, we were immediately met by an elderly Aymara woman from the nearby village who was heading out to cultivate in her chacra. I took the opportunity to interview her and see if she could tell us anything relating to the claim that Aramu Muru is a stargate or a dimensional portal of some kind.
¿Qué sabe ella de la puerta de Aramu Muru?
Kuma yatati uka akstoka uka Aramu Muru uka punko. Kuna historia en Kisoka. Dice que ella no sabe que el vigilante sabe qué cosa es el para qué. Sí, dice que hay un brujo que vive allá atrás, dice. Ese brujo también sabe la historia de este lugar de Aramu Muru.
¿Ella ha visto una vez que se abre la puerta, que sucede algo, luces, algo?
Kumaja hichaja taikaja amtas tatuka con akapunko llawirta sukama hakana kamantir.
Ya wiri usas mamita kanar kon tawrito. Wanta naga ayinte ukarokot ma wanta kira sirita inas chikat wanta uka mankantok askire se mamita kon tawrito.
Dice que su mamá hace años le contó de que unos músicos, una banda, entró y uno nomás salió, dice, y dice que sabe estar tocando en el interior de esa puerta, se cerró, dice. Esa es siempre así me contaba también a mí mis abuelos antes, y eso es lo que dice que su madre le contó a ella.
¿Cree ella que es una puerta dimensional, un portal, algo así?
Como ya te mancar montaña aquí uka hiwas mantiruka mancar han mis chuña aquí. Dice que ella no sabe.
A stargate is simply a doorway between dimensions and between locations. So much in the military funding, so much of the military machine has been to seek out and find the ancient technology and to control the technology of the stargates. The theme that is always expressed to me by those who are familiar with it, have seen them, have even gone through them, is that a sound form, a certain waveform of sound is used to open the gates.
This place is allegedly a stargate or a portal of some kind, a passageway into another dimension. Nobody knows who carved this gate into the rock. Nobody knows who carved it into the rock, and nobody knows why they carved it into the rock. I've spoken with various archaeologists and engineers and some of the village people, and it really is a mystery. Aramu Muru is a relatively new name, a new designation for this area. In the years past, it was more commonly known as the Devil's Gate, or the Gate of the Devil, because of some of the strange phenomenon that is alleged to have occurred here. I've heard stories of children walking by and disappearing into the gate, things both coming out and going in, creatures, demons. There are all kinds of stories surrounding this place. There are some ancient legends, some older legends that are that originated with the natives, but most of the legends surrounding this place now are contemporary tales, basically that people have invented after visiting this place. So this is alleged to be the doorway into the Stargate. Legend has it that there used to be a solar disk that could be placed into this indentation here that would activate the gate. Some of the natives here, some of the indigenous people have told us that the gate can also be opened, or has been known to be opened, with music, with vibrations, with sound. There's a lot of legends surrounding this place. A lot of it is hearsay, a lot of it is rumors, a lot of it is just plain BS.
Justo ha venido 2006 un muchacho arequipeño, religión espiritista. Se hace física, mucha física, como gente maleado. Entonces nosotros hemos venido con soja, con palo, y a gente maleado agarramos de ciento. Entonces se entró, se calató, entró, 6 horas se perdió. Después de 6 horas regresaron. Después yo le pregunté acá encima, ¿qué cosa hay adentro? Le dije. Yo sé esa historia, le dije. Entonces me ha dicho, había tenido 2 guardianes, me ha dicho, ambos lados, uno dice. Ese lugar santo se llama siempre desde Antigua, no es cualquiera. Ese es su nombre propio, ya viene Altarane, no es Aramu Muru. Entonces un guía que viene por un hotel, que se llama el Jorge Luis Delgado, ese se lo ha puesto su nombre, Aramu Muru. Entonces acá se hace mucha energía, se hace ceremonia, se gala como imán, dice. Sabiduría, inteligencia, se aumenta esa puerta, no es así nomás. Todo se aumenta, más limpio se van ustedes, entonces se carga energía, después sabiduría, se aumenta. No es así nomás. En la puerta que tiene hueco, hay que tocar la cabeza.
Most of the purported phenomena that happens around Aramu Muru occurs at night, especially around midnight. So I decided that we needed to camp out in front of the gate if we were going to have any chance of actually getting anything on film. We were told that the Aymara people avoid the area after dark precisely because of the legends describing people disappearing into the gate and demons coming out of it. Some of the young people from the nearby village came out to see what we were doing. Apparently, a group of gringos setting up camp in front of their infamous Stargate was not a particularly common occurrence.
Well, it's 8 o'clock at night here at Aramu Muru. It's pitch black outside. I'm sitting here in the alleged Stargate doorway. We've been taking readings with our compass. We've been told that sometimes the compasses go haywire around this area. We haven't registered anything yet, looking for magnetic anomalies, anything like that. But we'll be up till 12, keeping an eye on things. Well, it's about 12 o'clock at night here outside of the Aramu Muru Stargate, and as you can see, we're in the tent. We had to get in the tent and take cover because it started to hail, and basically we got caught in a thunderstorm up here in up in the mountains here. And if you look out here, you can see outside of our tent we got a few inches of hail literally surrounding us here in the tent, and there is right there the Aramu Muru gate. So that's how close we are here in our tent, and again we just got pelted with hail and pretty high winds and thunder and lightning. So we didn't see anything come out of the gate or go into the gate, but it's been interesting.
We got pummeled in that tent. a massive storm erupted in the atmosphere right above our heads. High winds and incredibly violent hail that pelted the fabric of our tent for well over an hour, which is very unusual for hail. We learned later that the storm had been localized right over Aramu Muru and the village adjacent to it. In other words, right on top of our tent.
Our film crew went through one of the most remarkable localized focused storms. Even the locals who had to come and push out their vehicle to get out of the mud that had been generated in such a short time marveled at it. But based on the response and the ferocity of that storm that was instantaneous, I would say even the manipulators of the weather wars on planet Earth right now would probably say that was a good shot.
En un futuro cercano, les dirán que los extraterrestres visitaron a la Tierra y enseñaron a los pueblos de la antigüedad la tecnología y la civilización. Pero será una mentira. La verdad es que los ángeles caídos o los ángeles rebeldes descendieron a la tierra en el mundo antediluviano y corrompieron la genética de la vida. Aunque su imperio fue destruido en la ira de Dios y estaban encadenados en la oscuridad eterna, dice la Biblia, vestigios del conocimiento de los vigilantes, su arquitectura, su tecnología, su rebelión y sus genes permanecen en la tierra.
When you weigh all of the evidence in the balance, the legends of the natives, the historical accounts of the conquistadors and chroniclers, the advanced megalithic constructions at Pumapunku, the signs of the great flood that buried them, the mind-blowing geoglyphs imprinted on the surface of the earth all over the Altiplano. What you have is undeniable proof of the Genesis 6 narrative and the technology of the fallen. We don't have to conjecture wild speculations about extraterrestrials or equally ridiculous fables concerning primitive cultures with ropes, ramps, and copper chisels in order to make sense of the world around us. All we need to do is to understand and believe what is written in the scriptures, and all the pieces fall into place.